Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Weyandt, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Applied Software. You're invited to join our MEP and construction innovation adventure with a mission to propel this great industry forward. My guest today is René Morkos. He is the founder and CEO of Alice Technologies and teaches at Stanford University's Ph.D. program in construction management. His professional experience ranges from working as a project manager in Afghanistan to building an underwater pipeline project in Beirut, from driving automation engineering on a $350 million gas refinery expansion project in Abu Dhabi to leading the development of a virtual design and construction model for Amsterdam's cruise ship terminal. Welcome to the show, René.
Thanks. Great to be here.
So that is a very diverse, cool background in construction. How'd you get into construction?
Really easy. My dad was in construction. When I graduated high school, he gave me a good piece of advice. He said, son, study anything you want, just don't do civil engineering. So I was a little lost in life. Now I know what I need to do. So I went and studied civil engineering. I've been in construction my whole life. I was on construction projects with my dad. First job was assistant site foreman. I actually didn't like school. It's kind of funny because I, ended up doing a PhD, but I was studying for 6 months a year and then working for 6 months a year. I would knock on construction projects. I would find the cool projects in town and then would knock on the door and be like, hey, you guys need any help? And I just like to build stuff. I would cut class and go build things, and like you mentioned, I just, all over the world, really gotten, and I've been so lucky to build these, some of the coolest projects in the world, right? I mean, the experience in Afghanistan, underwater, gas refineries, just really, really diverse projects. I like to build, the concept of like, it's not there and I did something and now it's there. It's going to be there forever. It's going to be there after I'm gone. Like that just always, jazz me, and I think that's what excites people in our field, or most people in our field, at least folks that I've talked to.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what's one of your favorite projects that you've worked on?
I don't know why this came to mind. First project I ever did as a project manager, I say that in quotes, is I built a bar out of airplane wings. So
nice.
Kabul airport would have like a plane crash roughly every 6 months. And so, this colonel in the NATO forces sort of showed up and he goes, I've got this project and I want to build this air bar out of this like crashed airplane. So I was like, okay, maybe we can, make this a little bit simpler. So we ended up getting the fire personnel on the base to cut the wings off, and we built a bar out of the plane wings. And the challenge, by the way, was because the plane wings are curved and you'd have to flip them around, getting the plane wing just right so you could put your drink on it. Was like the project I had as a PM. And, things progressed. I ended up building, military bases, landing strips, first windows, doors factory in the country, lots of design, build, serious projects. But that was the first, 2 days into the job. That was like the first thing they gave me. So I still think it was a cool, pretty darn cool project.
Yeah, it's a cool way to get your feet wet. Nice. We'll want to talk to you about generative construction. And first, let's kind of define the term. So what is generative construction?
Generative construction simulation. So those three things. And I'll go sort of backwards. Simulation is, I think, a major step forward for the field, because what people do today is they create estimates, they create schedules, but the computer isn't actually building it for you, right? And so what you get with Alice is that Alice is actually shuffling resources, labor, equipment, material through space and time to build your construction project. And that's a huge step forward, because what that means is you can change how the project is built. And that's the generative part. So what does generative mean? Generative is really a step up from parametric. And I don't want to throw too many terms, but these terms are really important because they have actually been done in design. It's not stuff that we invented. Parametric design, right? If you don't know what it is, you'll be an expert in about 30 seconds. So let's assume that you want to draw a cylinder. So you draw like a circle on the plane. So you want a bigger cylinder, you redraw it. A smaller cylinder, you got to redraw it every time there's a change. So somebody along, no, I'm going to have parameters, I'm going to height and radius, right? If I change the parameters, the tool redraws the object, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Perfect. And so that's basically what parametric technology is, right? And so my boss in Afghanistan walks in the office and goes, hey, I want to move the staircase. So I'm thinking like, crap, like, that staircase means that this elevation changes, this elevation, that cross section, that, so that layout. And it's kind of rippling through 47 drawings, right? Just like, and then, halfway through, 6 hours into like rippling that chain through, he walks in and goes, I changed my mind and put the staircase back where it was, and so with a parametric tool, which is BIM, right? That's what BIM is, by the way. It's two technologies, object-oriented and parametric. You move this to a 3D model and the change ripples through your system, right? So that's parametric design. Generative design is I'm even lazier. I'm human, right? I don't like to do any work. So I want you, the software, change the parameters for me. I want you to try all column heights from 10 to 16 feet, and do it by half-foot increments. And find, the minimum energy that this building's going to need and a maximum rentable area, whatever the number is. So that's what generative means, right? That's been done in design, right? Parametric, BIM, when I started my PhD in 2009, people were sort of like, what is BIM? Let's get a BIM, department. That kind of, started to become, I think, mainstream, let's say 2015. The last 3 to 5 years, what I'm really seeing in the design world is this generative computational design, right? Autodesk and other companies kind of pushing that forward. What we've done is generative construction simulation. So that's the big deal. That's what we managed to do. And it's the ability to basically tell the computer, hey, build my project for me 20, 30, 40 different times, right? And each of those different ways of building it has 6 million sequences. And so the parameters that we're changing are add a crew, rebuild it, add a crane, rebuild it. There's a delay, resequence around the delay. The design change, create the design change. So that's what it is, right? It's the ability to build and rebuild your project. Consequently, you can, as you can imagine, like imagine you had a building and you lived to be 1,000 years old and you went and built this building 20 different times. You'd probably be like, well, that 16th way that I built it was probably the best, right? Today, experience comes into play, but that experience is limited based on the past projects you've done, and things change. Even if you knew upfront the best way to build something got delayed, something changed, the design changed, and that change ripples through your entire system. That ripple through is really, really hard to do in your head. That's what the tool is.
Nice. So what are some of the barriers then for construction in really embracing this kind of thought process?
It's a great question. I'll tell you sort of like a small kind of almost a pet peeve of mine, right? People are always saying, oh, construction is not innovative, right? It's not true, right? The reason construction isn't innovative is that we just happen to solve things that are bigger and more complicated in other fields. Mm-hmm. Consequently, right, the technology required to digitize our field has not been available till about 5 years ago. For us to digitize construction, we have to digitize the input to construction, which is design, and that didn't really happen, like I said, till 2015, right? Mm-hmm. So the finance folks tend to be really smug about how digitized their industry is, but when you think about it, how hard is it to digitize accounts? It's like literally numbers, and when you remove it from this account, it appears in this account. They all have to sum up to the same number, right? Like relatively straightforward. Compare digitizing that kind of a system to, oh, guess what? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to drive 300 miles out in the middle of nowhere, put 6,000 people out there that haven't been there before. You're going to build all the facilities that need to live there, and then create a custom-made factory to build a custom-made product that we're never going to build again, right? And we're going to need 2 million things to do it. Like we work on the biggest, most complex operational problems in the world, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So to answer your question, what are the barriers? I think that one of the key barriers has been technology. Right, like a lot of construction folks have been burned in the past by, technology that I don't think promised, or delivered on its promises. Right, BIM is a great example. Right, BIM was like, I've done the research, I've read the papers, I really, as a researcher, spent so much time, researching this stuff, and I was like, BIM is going to be this magic solution. It's going to, solve all the problems. There's going to be a central database of all the problems, all the information. Right, that didn't happen, and BIM is a design tool. Right, it hasn't really translated into hardcore construction capability or benefits, right? So to answer your question, I think that what you're seeing lately, right, in 2017, I think was this break point. I call it almost like the construction renaissance, right? All this funding went into construction, right? People started to get excited about it, and it became sort of this next frontier. And to answer your question, I don't foresee major barriers to the adoption of innovation. I think it's almost, what I'm hearing now when I talk to companies is maybe the barrier is almost that there's too much stuff going on,
Mm-hmm.
and that's that kind of ties into, how the future will shape up, and happy to talk about that as well, and what will make the construction company of the future successful, right? And that's fundamentally changing, as we're looking at it today.
Yeah, I think that's interesting is with the kind of the contact boom over the last couple of years that you've seen. I think one of the kind of stumbling blocks, if you will, of some of those is people saw such a good opportunity in construction technology. And so there was this influx of people, but they weren't from construction. So they didn't understand the full complexities of the industry and all the little nuances and just incredible amounts of moving parts to what you're talking about earlier. And so they built all these tools and stuff that may have worked for some other industry, but coming into construction, it's not as easy to cram in the process and the thought process, the automations of an accounting firm into construction, because the complexities are just totally different.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny. Like I mentioned, I kind of worked throughout my PhD. I funded the program that way. I spent 6 months a year consulting, and that's what I was consulting with companies in Amsterdam around the world. But I would always say, like, hey, like construction. And I would interact with folks from outside construction that were trying to come into our field. And the advice I gave them then is like, hey, heads up, this is a different ballgame. Like, you're going to very quickly see that the stuff that you've been accustomed to managing, like, it will break down in our field. And I was right. I was actually correct, right? It is tougher, right? It is harder.
Yeah, for sure. So how do you encourage the industry then to kind of overcome or move past some of that, being burned by technology, or, kind of shaking off the unfair, it's not an innovative industry, and really move forward and adopt it now that the tech has finally kind of caught up with where they should be?
And the beautiful thing about, innovation, Todd, is that it's available to everybody, and the entry point is relatively low, right?
Yeah.
You've got to be able to, and Jeff Bezos has some quote about this, and I'm kind of really paraphrasing here, but it's like, to innovate, you need to be able to, put up with other people telling you that you're being an idiot, right? Take some risk and go through something that's uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
And the good news is that I see this in my day-to-day work, right? You'll have very, very advanced companies that are really, on top of their game, and they're starting to kind of lose the edge, in my mind, right? Because they're sort of thinking like, hey, we're now thinking that we figure this out. And it's oftentimes like the folks that are maybe a little bit lower in terms of revenue or name on the market or whatever it is, that are thinking, hey, I want to make a name for myself, right? And every company you go to has people like that. And those are the people that, like, that's the beautiful thing about innovation, right? The folks that want to take the risk, the folks that want to go through the pain and all this stuff are the ones that are going to, benefit down the line, right? That's fundamentally, that equation hasn't changed, I think, in the history of our species, right? So.
Yeah, well, it depends on how hungry you are. If you're going to go out there and really innovate, the hungrier you are, the probably more innovative you are. And then when you start relaxing on your laurels, you ease up on that innovation gas.
100%. And like, the thing that I'm seeing that's really sort of innovation is fundamentally, in my mind, an operations, capability, right? And so if you look at, what I'm working on, or construction, is fundamentally an operations research, operations management kind of game, right? And so if you look at what happened in the manufacturing industry in the 80s, I think that's exactly what's happening in construction today. Incredibly exciting, right? If you think of factories, if you went back to the 1950s or 60s and talked to factories were viewed like construction is viewed today. Oh, it's not sophisticated. It's a bunch of people, working long hours that are sort of, covered in oil and so on and so forth, right? What's happening today in construction is that change, right? And what in the 80s, when the Japanese car makers were sort of beating the American car makers, the Americans called up the Japanese folks and said, hey, how are you guys doing this? And the Japanese response was, come take a look. Like, here's the quote secret, right? And so what I'm trying to say with that is that, the folks that are doing the innovation, I have never seen anything in the world where an innovation is like, oh, all I got to do is like buy this box and press the button, right? And you'll see that with the folks that are successful. It's like, okay, it's like what's really exciting, and like I'm, sometimes even a little bit jealous of, we're building this AI software right in Silicon Valley, and it's like super sexy and it's great. But like, I'm looking at the folks that are in these construction companies. I'm like, man, this is the time that you want to be in a construction company, because you suddenly have like the startups are effectively outsourced R&D departments, right? Yeah. You suddenly got all these like, R&D departments out there. So, you're like the GC of the future is going to be successful based on three things: identifying cutting edge technology, evaluating it, right, analyzing it, and then integrating it. And how you integrate these tools, how you operationalize them in your processes, is really what the game's about today, right?
Yeah, interesting. So given the moment that construction is in right now, what are some questions that the industry really should be asking themselves that maybe historically they haven't been able to ask and kind of go down those roads?
I can give you sort of a micro and a macro answer, right? From a micro answer, which is from a generative simulation or an Alice Technologies perspective, what the technology enables, and I think any real powerful technology will allow you to ask and answer very different kinds of questions. Here's a typical example. Today, you go on a construction site and they'll be like, oh, we're using 3 cranes and, we got 6 steel crews and so on and so forth, right? With Alice, you can really, really dig into specific reasons why that's the case. Why is it 3, not 4 cranes? Why is it this design, not that design option? You can have very specific answers and very specific quantifiable answers to these questions, right? From a macro perspective, the questions you can ask is what data can, everyone's like, oh, well, we need to collect data. But sitting down and figuring out what data we're going to generate, how we're going to generate it, and how we're going to use it, and then use that use those insights to put back into the operations system that we generated data from, that's a full job, right?
Sure.
Kind of questions that you're starting to sort of think about, I guess, really even a level up is you're like, okay, well, where's the market headed? Where are we going to be 10 or 15 years from today? How are the supply chains going to get integrated? The decision latency, so the time you need from asking and answering a question today in construction is about 2 to 3 weeks, right? Your cycles, many construction projects, you've got monthly updates, right? So you basically got 1 month of information latency, right? Or 2 weeks, right? If you want to look at it that way. But what's going to happen is that information decision latency is going to drop and drop and drop, right? And so, yeah, I mean, the questions you can start asking yourself is where do I believe the market's going to head? And how can I start building the systems and processes in place that will take advantage of that change that's going to happen?
Yeah, interesting. So we're going to kind of shift and look at it through the AI lens. First, kind of what is AI? How do you really define what AI is? And then what kind of influence do you think AI has on the way that we're going to build?
Yeah, the term AI, I think, has been overused. People kind of slap it on every box, right? And anything today is AI. And people ask me like, what is it? And I always smile and I say, well, define artificial and define intelligence, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to answer it, right? Here's what I can tell you. I've been asked to give talks on, AI in construction. And I sort of said, look, AI, there's several different definitions, right? And it's nothing that one should be afraid of. I think, if I was at a cocktail party and somebody started talking to me about AI, I would really sort of push back and be like, look, AI is used for a lot of different things, right? The definitions that I think resonate, or the ones that in Silicon Valley I think have some legs, are what optimization technique does it use to solve the problem, right? And what I mean by that is that you've had classical search, but you've had machine learning, right? Neural networks. That's the kind of stuff that people will define AI based on how it's solving the problem, right? So machine learning, for example, or neural networks, or deep learning, for example, those are sort of how people have defined AI, or one way people have defined AI. Another way to define it is, what can it do that hasn't been done before, right? And that's if you look up artificial intelligence on Wikipedia, I think the last time I checked it about a year ago, that was like AI is whatever wasn't possible before, but now is possible, right? So that's kind of a changing definition, right?
Mm-hmm.
So fair enough. That's one way to view it, right? A third one that I kind of like as well, which is not that used, but what does it understand? So, does it like, what are the concepts that the software understands, right?
Uh-huh.
An interesting one, right? So those are, three different, approaches to the problem, right? Lately, what people have said, and AI was coined by a gentleman called McCarthy back at Stanford, I think in the 50s or early 60s, by the way, right? And the way that it's been defined, right, is by McCarthy. He defined it as basically the ability of a machine to solve problems that are solved by humans. So I gave kind of three definitions, right? What can it understand? How does it solve the problem? And what can it do, right?
Right.
The one that people use lately is how does it solve the problem, right? In the sense that it learns from itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
The truth of the matter, though, is that I believe that and here's an interesting kind of really cool thought experiment. If you look at the history of artificial intelligence, one of the things I've looked at is what field is it currently eating? So if you're looking back in the 50s and 60s, they're looking at simple algorithms, simple toy problems, right? Lately, what these algorithms can do is natural language processing, vision recognition, right? Or speech, right? Driving, right? But these machines are still like, what I think that the really big shift is going to happen when AI eats up philosophy, right? And so what's interesting is maybe 4 or 5 years ago, suddenly the English professors at these top schools became pretty hot cookies because of natural language processing, right? Or suddenly vision became pretty hot topic, and so on and so forth, right? I think that once the algorithms have a consciousness, right, is when you can really start calling it AI, this generalized AI, right? We're pretty darn far away from that happening, right? Mm-hmm. These things like, at the end of the day, it's still an algorithm, right? I've not seen a single example where it even with the some of the crazy stuff that's coming out of Google, and I'm blanking on the name, but like even there, there's simple things that it trips up on, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's at the end of the day, like we're still at a stage where they're still just algorithms. They're very sophisticated algorithms doing sophisticated stuff, but they are algorithms.
Yeah. So I'm sure you hear some pushback from the industry around AI some, but how concerned then should construction be around AI and kind of friend or foe?
I would say the concern should be zero. Here's something to think about. If you look at the advent of technology over the last 120 years, right? Look at the amount of time it takes to create a blueprint and create a copy of that blueprint. Look at the time it takes to create a design and create a copy of the design. Look at the time that it takes to create a structural analysis and to create, analyze it for earthquakes or whatever it is, right? Those numbers have gone down 10, 100,000 fold, right? Look at the advent of internet. Look at the advent, like all this technology has made it so much easier for us to do our jobs. How many hours a week are we working?
A lot.
Right. A lot, exactly. And so to answer the question, like I have yet to see an exact, like AI is not going to remove the demand side of the equation, right? I wish I could tell you that was the case because we'd be working less hours, right? But it's not, right? Revit did not eliminate the need for architects. They just don't do the busy work. They get to do the creative stuff, and, thinking about space, time, all that. Structural analysis program didn't eliminate the need for structural analysts. They're just doing bigger, more complex buildings. They can add more analyses to what they're doing. They can do energy, earthquake analysis and all that other stuff, right? With Alice, for example, what's really funny is people originally, schedulers, planners, kind of see the tool. They're like, yeah, I don't really know. Every single time they use it and they go, oh, this tool doesn't work without me. It really needs me. The pattern that we've seen at Stanford over and over again is the exact same pattern. The the quote AI, right, or the algorithms, whatever the latest, fashion is, right, whatever the latest buzzword is, that this is now the AI, right? But that's been happening for 20 years, right? And
yeah.
5 years ago was 3 years ago was big data, right? And it's natural language processing or vision or whatever the latest buzzword is, plug that in. But like all you're seeing over and over again is what the algorithm does is it does more of the crunching, and the human becomes the entity that doesn't do the crunching, sets up what needs to be crunched, interprets the results. Right. And that's the pattern that you're seeing over and over again. And I don't see that changing in the next 20 to 30 years. Like I really don't.
Yeah.
I've literally not seen
sure.
any one example where I was like, wow, that's going to change that dynamic. Like not once.
Right. Yeah. I think that the promise of technology, it allows people to focus on those more creative and more strategic elements and get rid of the more mundane aspects of the job, if you will.
Here's a different way to, like, I almost wish that was the case, right? It's like, oh, robots, they're going to put us all out of business. What happened to car manufacturing? How many people are employed in the car business? The only thing that's happened is that, oh, well, now one person can manage. Back in the day, it was one person, screwing a nut. Now one person can manage 10 robots that are screwing, 50 screws, right? Whatever the hell it is, right? And so that's not changed. And like robots are gonna, let's assume that we're move forward by 25, 30 years, right? Which is where I think that robots are really going to be building a lot of stuff in construction. You need people to manage the robots, to service the robots, to tell the robots what to do. Like I wish that was the case, right? But it's unfortunately not, right? The only thing that's going to happen is you'll be able to leverage more and more. Right. As one human, you can create bigger impact and then be responsible for more impact. Right. Mm-hmm. So, nice. and I don't think that's a bad thing, right? I think that if you look at technology historically, it has made less mundane work done by humans and more of the stuff that's creative and fun.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you speak and write about intelligence augmentation as well, too. What is that? And then what are the opportunities do you see for technologies to make us better thinkers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not AI, it's IA, right? You might argue, well, okay, so then what I was setting up to be crunched and interpreting, now I've got an algorithm that does even this piece. Well, guess what? You become the entity that then does, setting up what needs to be set up, right? It's this endless game, right? And it's never ended. Right. I don't think it will end, 30, 50 years, right? So to answer the question in terms of IA, like, yeah, that's exactly the pattern, right? Over and over again, it becomes, what ends up being done. Right?
Mm-hmm. Nice. What impact do you believe that tech innovation can have on the sustainability then in construction?
Huge, right? I think I'm a technologist, right? I think anybody in construction fundamentally is as well. I believe in technology's ability to elevate the standard of living of our species, right? And of all species on this planet, right? If you look at, what engineering has done in, let's say, since the Industrial Revolution, the last 120 years, 130 years, plus minus, right? Remarkable, right? If you look at biology as a system or nature as a system, it's been at it for, 3.5 plus minus billion years, right? The fact that engineering has done so much and so little is great, but one of the key, I think, shortcomings of engineering is this lack of sustainability as part of its ethos, right? But so what I'm saying is that I think that everybody in construction or any, field on the planet today, we need to start thinking about, hey, there's I think it's 8.5 billion of us at this point, right? How do we build systems that enable us to continue doing what we're doing, not for the next 50 years, but the next 50,000 years, right? And that's going to require, I think, a fundamental shift in the way we behave as a species, right? And so, how can technology help in this? Like, the sky's the limit, right? There's no reason why we can't use 100% renewable energy, right? If nuclear fusion happens like they're predicting in the 2030s, right? That's almost unlimited energy, right? That we're going to be able to provide to the world, right? The materials that we're using, right? Like, why it's such a strange thing, right? Like, why, think about it, why go build a building that you can't then just dismantle and use to build another building, right? Like, why isn't our way of building is 100% renewable, right? reusable in some ways, right? And so with Alice, what you can do is the big difference, or why do we figure out how to build things 17% faster, 13% cheaper, right? Well, it's because we squeeze out inefficiency. The idle times, the times that those machines are waiting, or the inefficient cycle times, we can squeeze that out, reducing carbon emissions, right? But again, what technology can do, the materials that you're using to build with, the way that you're using to build, the supply chain, knowing who's building what, when, and where, those efficiencies, I think, will enable us to move towards that sustainable vision. And I think we all need to, on some way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah, interesting. So, want to get your perspective on the kind of the global scale. Your career has spanned the globe. Alice is worldwide as well. What are the differences in the ways and maybe the pace that the different cultures are really embracing new content coming in?
One of the things I think is really beautiful, and so I'm half Czech, half Lebanese, so Europe, Middle East, bounced around a lot. The world is flattening out in some ways, right? What I mean by that is that the difference between the top countries and economies and the ones that are not, the difference between the first and the third, first and second world is closing, right? 20, 30 years ago, few companies outside the US or Europe sort of would be innovative. That's changing, right? The democratization of education, I think, is huge, right? What's happening in the educational field, like the fact that you can get onto Coursera right now and for $49 a month, literally access the top courses from Stanford, Harvard, and all the other institutions on the planet is mind-blowing. And it's great. I strongly believe, and have always believed, that wealth and success should not be locked in, from a privilege or a where you were born or you were born as. Right. I really, really believe that we need to strive towards a world that's equitable. Right. And so to answer your question, like globally, what you're seeing is a lot of companies, in Asia, in Northern Europe, Latin America, right, really, really are having innovation centers. They're sending people to Silicon Valley, looking at all the technology here. They have graduates from the top schools in Europe and the US, right? China obviously is an upcoming sort of power. So a lot of the game is a lot more diverse, and I think that it's open to a heck of a lot more people, right? 20, 30 years ago, if you were someone sitting in somewhere in Latin America or Africa, I think it was harder, right? Without the internet, without all of these things. Today, you're really seeing top performance from companies and countries that you wouldn't expect before, and I think that's great.
Yeah.
And even the Silicon Valley, almost monopoly on innovation, you're starting to see that it's starting to, other places are having, venture capital and incubators and accelerators and all that ecosystem, and I think that we're moving towards a global ecosystem where there's almost a global game, right, of sort of risk and reward, right, and I think that's great.
Yeah, definitely, very cool. Well, what does the next 10 years of construction look like to you? Then what's kind of going to be the biggest difference compared to the last 10 years?
I think it's just going to be incomparable. I think that this is something that I am now absolutely convinced of this. There's a new ecosystem coming at us in the construction field, right? That ecosystem is going to be a data-driven ecosystem that will get decided by, in my opinion, by 30 to 50 companies that are playing that game today. Mm-hmm. And it's not a one person or one company sort of game, but what's happening in construction, right? And it's just mind-blowingly exciting, right? And not just from our company's perspective, it's just looking around at the rate of change, rate of acceleration, innovation, right? But what you're seeing is that what's going to happen over the next 10 years is digitization, right? Construction is slowly becoming more and more digitized, right? The plans are digital, the 3D models are digitals. Your subcontractors are represented in the computer, for the Procores of the world, the Autodesk, the Building Connected, the Plan Grid, the Canvas Robotic, like all of these companies are digitizing some piece of that puzzle, right? Mm-hmm. The more of it that gets digitized, the more efficiency that you can unlock, right? And so what I believe is that the next, say, 5 years, 3 to 5 years, are going to be really heavy on the digitizing of the industry, right? What a lot of people don't think about, or I think don't realize, is that, as I like to say, the bricks still have to go on top of each other, right? And so what I mean by that is that there's a digital reality, there's a digital sort of representation, but an analog reality. And those worlds will need to communicate, right? And so you're seeing companies, like Doxel or other companies that are sort of, doing this data capture from sites, right, to update progress, right? And I think that one of the key puzzles that hasn't been solved is that interface between the analog reality and the digital representation, right? And that's what's going to start to get unlocked, in my opinion, in that 5 years from now, right? I think that research is really the bleeding edge research of where we're at today. And once you connect those two worlds, that's when you're going to start seeing some really, really crazy, efficiency jumps. Right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think the next 10 years is going to be a wild and crazy ride, but the potential here is really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most exciting time to live in construction, I think, ever. Truthfully, that 2017 was when it kind of, it was a tipping point, right? And it's just a mind blowing time, right? I mean, like, if you were to be in construction at a point in time, like, this is it. Like, there's so much stuff happening. Like, you can, get online and just see, conferences, tech. Companies that are getting founded, acquired, tech that's getting developed, research, like, it's just super, super cool, right? Like, It's like beyond my wildest dreams, right? I'm in construction, at this point, 20 plus years, right? Beyond anything, like, when I was studying, when I was 17, 18, 19, like, never would have imagined that construction was going to suddenly be this, like, one of the sexiest fields on the planet, right? And it is, right? Super, super exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Well, how do people find out more about Alice and get a hold of you?
Oh, really easy. Go on our website, alicetechnologies.com, and fill out a form, and we'll be in touch. Yeah, we tend to work on projects that are sort of 100 million and up. And we teach it. We give a certificate program. We sit with your company, look at what you guys are trying to do. What are the problems that you're trying to solve, and how this technology can help do it, right? And the level of control that you get with such a technology is incomparable. And in terms of, the ability to be confident in your estimate, confident in your schedule, confident in your ability to reschedule at any point when there's a problem.
What kind of projects are you guys really deploying Alice on? Any fun stories there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We've deployed in some of the largest projects in the world. We were just involved in the Edmonton $2.6 billion successful bid project. We're working with companies like Bouygues, Austin Bridge and Road, Parsons, Takanaka, some of the largest companies in the world. We were involved on several sort of large rail and tunneling projects, in the hundreds of millions, in several occasions over $1 billion. And also two headquarters of companies that I think everybody in the world is familiar with, right? Large, $1 billion headquarters. So that's the kind of stuff that we do, and we really like doing.
Yeah. Nice. Well, last question I got for you. What does innovation mean to you?
I'll give you a quote from Edison. Innovation is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration.
Nice.
Most people, people use that term very lightly, but I highly recommend a book that was recommended to me by venture capitalists here in the Valley, How to Fly a Horse. And that book is the best book I've read on innovation. It absolutely, completely explains what innovation is, right? How to fly a horse. Innovation, to me, most people think it's like, oh, it's this, I'm going to find this new tool or this new idea or this new twist to something that I'm doing. And it's like this, like light bulb moment where I'm going to go implement it. I can absolutely assure that innovation is a long, arduous, painful process, right? Even if you have the perfect tool, but learn how to use it, implement it, change your processes around. Some would call them failures, but again, to Edison's point, he didn't say I failed 1,000 times. I just found 1,000 times it won't work.
Right.
That's exactly it. And then that's what innovation is, right? And it's a long, arduous, risky process that results in very deep, fulfilling journeys to the innovators, right? And very substantial benefits and impacts to their organizations and I'd say their lives.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's a great way to end it. René, thanks so much for coming on. This was a great conversation.
Thanks so much, Todd. Really enjoyed it.